This is the Nintendo Iceberg. If you don't already know what an iceberg video is, it's basically a long list of facts of any given subject, formatted from most well-known facts at the top of the list to more obscure and oftentimes creepier facts listed towards the bottom. This particular iceberg was created by Reddit user Invisible Elliot, and it focuses on everything Nintendo, its history, its many franchises, and basically everything in between. Nintendo has been around for a long time, so it's only natural for them to have a lot of topics to talk about, from reviving the video game market in the US, to making some of the most iconic consoles of all time, as well as having some of the biggest failures in the video game industry. Nintendo has been through it all, and I would love to go over it. Without further ado, let's dive deep into the Nintendo Iceberg. This was a famous myth from Super Mario 64, in which you could supposedly unlock Luigi as a playable character through a series of increasingly convoluted methods. Mario 64 was a truly influential game, as it paved the way for many other 3D platformers, as well as successfully making the transition from 2D to 3D. Although it has aged, many would still consider it to be one of the best games of all time. However, many people were disappointed that Luigi didn't even make an appearance. This caused some players to believe that Luigi was playable, he just needed to be unlocked. And so, a rumor began, with the only piece of evidence being that there was a sign in the fountain's courtyard that supposedly read, L is real, 2401, which many assumed stood for Luigi is real, and 2401 being the secret key to unlocking him. Many theories ranged on what 2401 actually stood for, from finding every coin in the game, which would have totaled to 2,401 coins, or even going around the fountain for 2,401 times in a row, which would somehow unlock Luigi. But if you did either of those things, you would soon realize that it was a huge waste of time, because Luigi was never in the game to begin with. Despite this, the rumors still persisted, and some people still claimed that Luigi was in the game. While researching this topic, I discovered that IGN, way back in 1996, actually put out a $100 bounty if anybody can find proof that Luigi was in the game, which again, no one ever claimed because Luigi was not in the game. IGN also used to go by N64.com, which is neat. Anyways, the sign in the fountain is also barely readable, if there's anything there at all. Some fans have tried to decipher it over the years, with some players even stating that it actually read Eternal Star, despite the sign looking like this. Apparently, one fan even went as far as analyzing every minute detail, down to the pixel to try and read the sign, and somehow came up with a secret star lies here. Which there isn't, but the effort was there. This same sign is also in Ocarina of Time as a reused asset, which pretty much confirms to me that this sign really doesn't say anything at all and is just a barely readable sign texture. Here's a better look at the sign if you want to try and read it for yourself. I personally never found anything in the sign, but other people have. Let me know down in the comments if you can actually read anything here. Some fans even ended up sending letters to Nintendo way back in the day asking if Luigi was in the game, to which Nintendo would actually respond, saying that L is real didn't mean anything at all, and that the developers just put in the Luigi hints as a joke. I'm pretty sure the person who responded didn't really have an answer, but gave their best interpretation on what the L is real hoax meant. As the years went on, and without Luigi being found, most people came to the conclusion that Luigi really wasn't in the game. Shigeru Miyamoto, the creator of Mario, and the director of Super Mario 64, in an interview was asked if Luigi was cut from the game, to which he stated the following. He was in the game. Ultimately, due to memory issues, we had to take him out. Then we were going to include him in a Mario Bros style minigame, but because most users probably only had that one controller when they first buy their N64, for that reason, and others, we decided not to. Luigi would later be added as a playable character in Mario 64 DS, alongside Yoshi and Wario. He even encouraged you to gamble. What a good sport. But as luck would have it, 24 years later, and 1 month after the game's initial release, the Nintendo Giga Leak would occur, which exposed a lot of Nintendo's source codes, documents, and a lot of stuff that they didn't want to be public. The Giga Leak ended up giving us an early development build for Super Mario 64, which also contained a player model for none other than Luigi himself, which in a way made L is real 2401 kinda true. Also, in Super Mario Odyssey, They actually had a power star in the recreation of the fountain from Super Mario 64, which I think is a nod to the rumor. Before Nintendo became known as a video game company, they had first started out as a toy company, or more specifically, a playing card company. Nintendo was founded way back in 1889, and they were primarily known for making Hanafuda cards, which is a whole other rabbit hole, but they're basically Japanese playing cards. They began to branch out to other products during the 1960s, but this became somewhat challenging as every venture they expanded into failed. Even their card business began to struggle a bit, causing the company to throw everything at the wall to see what sticks. They somehow managed to find some success with their toys division, which actually ended up saving the company from near bankruptcy. Nintendo made a lot of toys over the years, including the Ultra Hand, the Ultra Machine, the Love Tester, and many more. Some of these toys were designed by Gunpei Yokoi, who actually ended up making some of the more successful toys for Nintendo, such as the Ultra Hand, which is one of the toys that actually helped Nintendo stay in business. But Nintendo began to see new potential in the then up-and-coming video game market. Nintendo did collaborate with Magnavox, the company who created the first video game console, and helped make the light gun for them, but they truly didn't start making video games into the late 70s. They would enter the arcade market with the games Sheriff and Radar Scope. While Sheriff was successful, Radar Scope was a financial failure and almost led Nintendo into bankruptcy once again. Nintendo would end up using all the unsold Radar Scope machines and converted them into the far more successful game Donkey Kong, released in 1981. They would also make the portable gaming system with the Game & Watch, which happened to be made by Gunpei Yokoi and helped further cement Nintendo into the gaming industry. Jumping slightly ahead, Nintendo would then release the Family Computer, or Famicom, in 1983 in Japan, which had a slow start, but quickly gained steam and became really successful by the end of 1984. Nintendo would then try to sell their console over to the States, first making a deal with Atari to distribute their console under the Atari name. But the deal would soon fall apart, since Nintendo accidentally let other companies use their properties despite being in an exclusivity contract with Atari. This then caused Nintendo to sell their console on their own, but then the video game crash of '83 would occur, which caused video games to be seen as extremely unprofitable due to the oversaturation of the market. Despite this, Nintendo will still try to sell their console, but they decided to make some changes to make it appear less like a video game system and more like a VCR, hence the design. They also marketed it as an entertainment system that could use toys and just so happened to play video games. The Nintendo Entertainment System, or the NES, was then released in 1985, becoming an instant success and single-handedly reviving the dead video game market in the US. While Nintendo is primarily known now as a video game company, they do still make toys and have recently started to branch out into even more products, such as movies and even a theme park. It's just so neat to know that all this started from a company selling playing cards. They would even on occasion reference their own toy company roots in some of their games, like in WarioWare, and even in the new Zelda game, where one of the new abilities is named after the Ultra Hand. During the lead up to Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, many fans were eager to know which fighters would be added to the famous fighting game. Smash Bros. Is known as the celebration of video games, since they include game characters across many different franchises from all branches of video games. So it's kind of a big deal for a character to be included into the series, and many wanted their favorites to be in it. Because of this, many people will try to find out as early as possible on who would be included, which has caused a long history of leaks to occur for almost every game in the series. Leaks in Smash Bros. Are almost guaranteed every time a new game is on the horizon, and this time it was no different. On October 24, 2018, a photo of the supposed complete roster was leaked on 4chan, showing what appeared to be a group of unannounced fighters like Banjo and Kazooie, Ken, Shadow, and many other popular fan picks. There was also multiple renders of the then up-and-coming Grinch film, which subsequently caused this to be known as the Grinch Leak. This leak actually proved to be quite contentious at the time, as many people believed this to be real, while others were detractors, saying that it was too good to be true. With fans being divided on the issue, internet sleuths would soon discover the leaker's potential name was poorly hidden in the series of leaked photos. This caused people to discover the leaker's potential LinkedIn profile, as well as finding out that they worked for a French marketing company that has worked with both Nintendo and Bandai Namco in the past. Other people then supposedly reached out to this company and confirmed that this person of interest did still work for them, which only led to even more people believing in the leak. There really was a lot of crackpot theories out there at the time, and many people were scrambling to figure out if this leak was true or not, with more and more people leaning on it being true. However, once the final presentation for Smash Bros. Ultimate came out on November 1st, 2018, it proved once and for all that the Grinch Leak was indeed fake. Only one of the supposed leaked characters was shown off, and the last fighter was confirmed to be Incineroar, who was not even present in the leak, proving this to be a hoax once and for all. Not only that, but other characters such as Shadow and Isaac were once again relegated to being assist trophies, as well as confirming Piranha Plant as the first DLC character. Some fans were pissed that their favorites didn't make it in, but most seemed to be okay with the Grinch Leak being fake. But this should have been proven false sooner, since the French company being accused of the leak came out with a statement that the supposed leaker hasn't worked for them since 2016. This has led fans to assume that the supposed leaker's name was used to give the leak more credibility. This was by far one of the most elaborate and believable hoaxes of all time. There really hasn't been a hoax like this that spread like wildfire, and the real leaker behind this whole hoax has yet to come forward, which just leaves a bit of mystery to this whole situation. On a brighter note, at least Banjo and Kazooie did eventually make it into Ultimate as DLC. Eventually. And through all this chaos, the real leak was mostly ignored by the general public. I've talked about this on my channel plenty of times before, but basically, the myth goes as follows. In Pokemon Red and Blue, there was originally only 150 Pokemon in the game, but there was one more secret Pokemon that was also in the game, but was extremely rare, being the mythical Mew. This started a long string of theories on how you could get Mew in your game, most famously with Mew being under the truck. If you would surf to this area before the SSN leaves, you would see a truck, which you would then need to use the move Strength on, which would then push it aside and allow you to encounter Mew. This of course wasn't true, but the myth still spread regardless. There was just something so intriguing about the idea of a secret Pokemon being in the game, and it ended up inspiring even more myths of rare Pokemon being hidden in the game as well. The myth was so popular that even the developers added a secret item in the remix for Red and Blue, but they only hid a measly revive in the Let's Go games. Interestingly, Mew itself was originally not going to be included in the games at all. The developers for the games have stated that Mew was a last-minute addition, and nobody knew it was in the game until it was announced officially 2 months after the game's release. In an Iwata Ask interview, one of the developers for Pokemon Red and Green and the creator of Mew, Shigeki Morimoto, talked about how they included Mew at the last minute. We put Mew in right at the very end. The cartridge was really full, and there wasn't room for much more on there. Then the debug features which weren't going to be included in the final version of the game were removed, creating a minuscule 300 bytes of free space. So we thought that we could slot in Mew there. What we did would be unthinkable nowadays. In another interview with Nintendo Power, Morimoto went on to state that Mew was added just 2 weeks before the game finished development, showing just how last minute Mew really was. While Mew was a secret that most Japanese players weren't sure was real, it was different here in the States, since the anime was released first, which made us fully aware of Mew. So, how would you actually be able to obtain Mew? Well, the only way to actually receive Mew in your copy of Pokemon Red and Blue was by going to an in-store event, which were far and few between, meaning most kids didn't know or didn't live anywhere near the event. But making Mew so cumbersome to get might have actually helped Pokemon become more popular, as it helped build more intrigue into the games themselves. In fact, even the CEO of Pokemon has admitted the following: there's no denying that Mew's existence played an extremely significant role. However, Mew was eventually found out to actually be obtainable in the game, through a very convoluted fashion of course. It involves you having to perform the Trainer Fly glitch, which basically allows you to encounter any Pokemon in the game, including Mew. This glitch can actually be performed in any version of the game, including Virtual Console. And if you want to learn how to do it, there are plenty of guides online on how you too can finally get Mew into your game. In Luigi's Mansion, if the player enters the telephone room and answers the phone call, you would then be placed in a certain angle, and if lightning happened to strike while you were answering the phone, you would then see Luigi's shadow on the ceiling, making it appear like he is hanging. Many players rightly found this to be disturbing, with some speculating that this was an intentional Easter egg meant to show that Luigi is dead while playing through the game, which would totally fit the vibe of kids' first horror game. This, of course, was just a visual bug that made the game appear like Luigi's shadow was hanging. This bug was later fixed in the 3DS remake of the game, so it's safe to assume that our fairy green plumber is safe and sound. Never mind. This is another famous myth where you could supposedly receive the Triforce from The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time as an in-game item. The Triforce is a mythical artifact that is present in almost every Zelda game, represented as 3 triangles, with the Triforce of Power, Courage, and Wisdom. If put together, it can grant the user any wish, and is usually the source of conflict that occurs in these games. This naturally made the idea of actually obtaining the Triforce very appealing, and led to the theories that it could be obtainable in-game. The myth mostly stemmed from how the user interface in Ocarina of Time showed an outline of the Triforce and almost looked like it needed to be filled in, similar to the Sage medallions. This of course spawned the usual rumors and theories on how you could obtain the Triforce, ranging from playing certain songs backwards at certain spots of the map, to more ridiculous stuff like beating the game 20 times in a row without dying. But like many other myths, this was proven to be false by simply trying it for yourself and finding nothing but disappointment. Still, it didn't stop certain people from spreading the rumor, with some going as far as doctoring screenshots of getting the Triforce in the game. The most well-known hoax was from this user from an old Zelda message board, who claimed to have found the Triforce in Ocarina of Time. They at first didn't show proof until the day after they claimed to have found it, showing screenshots of them standing in front of it. Despite the very low quality of the photo, many actually fell for it, asking the OP how they found it and how it could be obtained. OP then proceeded to give out more hints on how to get the Triforce, rather than just flat out telling people what to do. The hints will only get more ridiculous, with OP stating that there was a secret song that could be learned from the sages, and how this would not only open up a whole new area, but even a new temple, where the Triforce would supposedly be waiting for the player after completion. Despite how obviously false this was, most users actually believed it, since this was a time of the early internet where you could pass off any lie and the majority of people would just assume you're telling the truth. Eventually, people managed to figure out that the screenshots didn't line up with the game, such as Link's sword being on the wrong side. Users called this out and demanded answers, to which OP just stopped responding. Eventually, they came back months later with this masterful response.
People from all over the world try my story. They will swallow it like candies, no matter that the pictures are a total fake. The mistakes I made in purpose were to show how silly can some people be. Some idiots will show proofs against the pictures, will try to show their knowledge in the usage of software like Photoshop and will prove me that they know nothing. None really discovered how I made them. People will play and play non-stop and will not even sleep. Everything just for me. Yeah. I'm still receiving emails. I can't believe this.
This whole mess has actually been archived, and you can read the entire chain of emails for yourself and experience the madness that was this form of elaborate trolling. Link in the description. While the Triforce was never made obtainable in the final version of the game, there may have been evidence that the Triforce was in the beta version. There is old footage of the beta version of the game, back when it was still called Zelda 64, where we clearly see Link getting the Triforce. Sadly, the Triforce was cut from the final build of the game. The story doesn't end here, however, as 23 years later, at Games Done Quick 2022, a charity event where people speedrun games to raise money, they proceeded to play an unmodified cartridge of Ocarina of Time. They then proceeded to show proof of the Triforce being obtainable. Link would then make a wish to see the feature, and he would be teleported to Breath of the Wild. If you couldn't already figure it out, this was just a ROM hack of the game, but it was done in fun spirits and for charity, so no real harm done. This whole ROM hack actually has a lot going behind it, as they use something called arbitrary code execution to basically tell the game to do whatever they want, It's very complicated, and there's a video by SwinkyBox who goes over it in more detail and explains it better than I ever could. Link in the description. The Philips Compact Disc Interactive, or CDI, was a failed video game console that was released back in 1991, but it had a very interesting connection to Nintendo. Back in the 90s, Nintendo was in the process of making a disc-based add-on for the Super Nintendo, so they partnered up with Sony to make the add-on. This actually went pretty far into development, with prototypes being found out in the wild, as well as being shown off at that year's Consumer Electronics Show, unveiling the Nintendo PlayStation. However, Nintendo got cold feet with the deal with Sony due to licensing issues. So Nintendo went behind Sony's back and partnered up with Philips, who happened to be Sony's direct competitor. This partnership led to the creation of the CDI games that were allowed to use the Nintendo IP, which resulted in the following.
Not into the pit, it burns!
I won!
You know what they say, all toasters toast toast.
These games were known as some of the worst games of all time. Like seriously, just look at them. The Philips CDI will end up becoming a financial failure, being abandoned by Philips by 1996, and cancelling all future projects with Nintendo. So, what happened with the original partnership with Sony? Well, they took what they already worked on with Nintendo and developed it into the now iconic PlayStation, which would then proceed to dominate the video game market for the next couple generations. But at least Nintendo got more shoe, and really, what else could you really ask for?
My friend, as long as you have enough rupees.
Oh god, where do I even begin with this one? So, in the trailer for New Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe, it showed off the Super Crown ability, which allowed Toadette to transform into Peachette, which made her look and play like Peach. Then, a comic by Twitter user AYYK92, or Haniwa, was then released in which Mario and Bowser would both get rejected by Peach. So Bowser suggests using the Super Crown power-up, transforming Bowser into Bowsette, a Peach x Bowser hybrid. The internet would then proceed to go feral for this idea, making various fanarts of Bowsette, both safe and degenerate, cosplays, fanfictions, ROM hacks, fan games, and much, much more. Some might say too much. Seriously, this whole thing was a phenomenon. And it's crazy to think that all of this came out of a fan comic. Bowsette even has an entire Wikipedia page about the fan comic, which is just so insane to think about. There was also Booette, a Peach variant of Boo, but it was nowhere near the popularity of Bowsette. For many years, fans for the Legend of Zelda series were unsure what the exact timeline for the games were. The continuity has always been really confusing, as the games constantly jumps around in the timeline, with some games taking place in the future, some of them in the distant past, and others seemingly taking place in alternate histories. Theories would range on how the timeline actually lined up, with the main theory being that the timeline was actually split into two at a certain point. However, it wasn't until Nintendo released an official timeline in a book called Hyrule Historia, which confirmed that the series actually had multiple timelines, which goes as follows. The first game in the series is Skyward Sword, which introduced many of the series staples, such as the creation of the Master Sword, how the people from the sky descended into the land to make Hyrule, the connection between the goddess Hyla and Zelda, and how the Demon King Demise placed a curse on the Hero of Time and Zelda's descendants, where they would have a never-ending conflict with his incarnation, Ganondorf, which explains why they constantly recycle the same story. The next games in the timeline are the Minish Cap, which introduces Link's hat, even though it was present in Skyward Sword, but whatever, followed by Four Swords. Then we jump to the most important game in the series, Ocarina of Time. This game is basically the nexus point of the entire timeline, as it splits it up into three separate parts. One in which you are defeated, creating the Dark Timeline, one in which you are victorious, and another one in which you're also victorious but are sent back in time to relive Link's childhood. The timeline isn't perfect, but most fans seem to be happy with it, although some fans have been annoyed at some of the inconsistencies. The Zelda timeline was updated again when the Hyrule Encyclopedia was released, including some of the newer games at the time, like Link Between Worlds and Triforce Heroes. However, Breath of the Wild has never had an official confirmation on where it goes on the timeline, leaving many fans to speculate on where it actually takes place. Some fans have theorized that it takes place in the far future, with some even theorizing that the timeline kinda merges together, or could even be seen as a soft reboot of sorts. Finally, Tears of the Kingdom takes place for roughly 2 to 3 years after Breath of the Wild, which would place it last on the timeline. Honestly though, there is a lot to unpack with the Zelda timeline, and I might even make a separate video just diving into all the details of it, cause there really is a lot, and some of it really doesn't connect all too well. Like even with Tears of the Kingdom being a direct sequel to Breath of the Wild, there are things between those two that somehow still don't add up. The Zelda timeline is a dense topic, and you could get lost in all the intricate details of it. It's a little bit too much for me to comprehend, but it's so cool to see all the theories surrounding it. The Mother series, also known as Earthbound, is a quirky RPG series that has 3 mainline releases, with the third game, Mother Threeie, only ever being released in Japan on the Game Boy Advance on April 20th, 2006. Despite the acclaim the game has received, Nintendo has never given the game an official localization, which is the process of giving a game a release in other territories. Many fans have desperately wanted the game to have an official localization since many perceive it to be one of the best games of all time. But despite this, Nintendo has pretty much ignored all fan pleas to localize the game. Nintendo has on occasion acknowledged the fan outcry for the game, like during their 2014 E3 presentation, with this incredibly cursed robot chicken sketch of Nintendo poking fun at the situation.
Come on, Reggie, give us Mother 3!
How about this instead?
Despite this, fans took it upon themselves to make an unofficial translation for the game, which is the only way for non-Japanese fans to experience this highly acclaimed title. But fans never gave up hope since they still pray every day and night for an eventual official release of Mother 3. But when Lucas was released as a DLC for Smash Bros. 4 on June 14, 2015, the creator for the Mother series announced that the original Mother game, which also didn't have an official localization, was coming to the Wii U eShop and being renamed as Earthbound Beginnings. This once again gave hope to fans that Mother 3 was around the corner. And 8 years later, Mother 3 has still not been localized. The last time Nintendo ever acknowledged Mother 3 was in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, with Lucas's final smash, which included 2 of Mother 3's party members, as well as having characters included in spirits. But even with Nintendo's cold shoulder on the series, fans are still holding out hope for the localization of the game, with fans sometimes being spotted in the wild, holding signs demanding for the localization of the game. MissingNo is an infamous glitch in Pokemon Red and Blue. Basically, the original Pokemon games are held together by duct tape and are riddled with bugs and errors that would make modern-day Bethesda blush. For example, did you know that Ghost types are super effective against Psychic, but due to a bug, Psychic was actually made immune to Ghost, making Psychic Pokemon extremely powerful. Yeah, these games are messed up. MissingNo is actually fairly easy to encounter. All you have to do is talk to the old man in Viridian City and watch the catching Pokemon tutorial. Afterwards, you're gonna fly to Cinnabar Island and surf on this specific part of the island, and if you did everything correctly, you would soon encounter MissingNo. MissingNo is actually a glitch Pokemon that shows up when the game loads data improperly. I'm not really sure why it exactly happens, but it's just that the game isn't sure what to load, and it gives us this beautiful shape instead. Encountering MissingNo causes a lot of fun stuff to occur, and you can even catch it if you want. If you do, you would notice that they are a normal/bird type, a type that doesn't exist in the main game. The game will also become really weird, such as glitching the player and their Pokemon sprites. It can even wipe your Hall of Fame records after you encounter it. But by far, the most useful thing about this glitch was the item duplication effect, which allowed the player to duplicate the 6 item slot in their bag. And since you could encounter MissingNo multiple times, it effectively gave the player unlimited rare items like Master Balls and rare candies. Nintendo has officially responded to the glitch Pokemon, stating that players should erase their game file if they encounter MissingNo. But this is a lie, as simply restarting the game could also fix the graphical bugs. MissingNo could also take different appearances depending on what your character's name is. such as the fossil Pokemon forms and even the ghost sprites. Trading MissingNo to Pokemon Stadium will also turn MissingNo into an unusable substitute doll, while in Stadium 2, it will show up as a Ditto and permanently stay that way if you save your game. This really is one of the most famous glitches of all time, and the more you learn about how it works, the funnier it gets. In Super Mario Galaxy 2, if you go into Shiverburn Galaxy, go into first person mode, and look off into the distance, you can faintly see these creatures looking down at you ominously. This ended up sparking a lot of interest from the fans because of how strange and unusual they were. For a Mario game, that is. One fan actually hacked the game to go through the game's files and discovered that the figures actually had a name, being Hell Valley Skytrees. This rightfully came across as super off-putting since the Mario series isn't exactly known for horror, unless you count Luigi's Mansion, but even then, that game is also family friendly. The Hell Valley Skytrees were actually super popular back when creepypastas were huge. A lot of videos will constantly cover the topic, talking about how mysterious and spooky they were. But the interest of them kind of died down since the Hell Valley Skytrees are realistically just textures that most people won't even notice and aren't a real threat to the player. However, when the trailer for WarioWare Get It Together was released, people almost immediately spotted the Skytrees once again, although with them being much less spooky this time around. Majora's Mask is a very interesting game, being a sequel to what many consider to be one of the greatest games of all time. Upon release, many initially had mixed thoughts on the game, but eventually people have since come around to appreciate the title for its gloomy and dark atmosphere, at least for a Zelda title. The story is also unusually dark, since you have to save this town from being destroyed by this very friendly looking moon in less than 3 days, and I believe this is one of the only Zelda games where you can flat out lose if you happen to run out of time. With how bleak a lot of this game is, it's no wonder that many fans gravitated to having more dark theories surrounding the game, the most commonly known one being how each of the 5 main areas represents the 5 stages of grief. Let me explain. Clocktown represents denial, with the townsfolk seemingly being ignorant of the fact that the moon is going to crash into them, with even some of them being in denial even as the moon is about to collide with them. The Deku Palace represents anger, since the Dekus take out all their anger at an innocent monkey for supposedly bringing hardships to their land and blaming him for the disappearance of their princess. The Goron Village represents bargaining, with how the hero of their village, Daramani, is dead, and once you meet his ghost, he immediately asks you to bring him back to life with any sort of magic. Zora's Cape represents depression, since a character named Lulu has lost her eggs, leaving her completely stoic and miserable until Link is able to rescue them. Ikana Village represents acceptance, as Link overcomes himself and finds enlightenment with the flight arrows, and beat the boss with them. I have to be honest, while this series sounds cool on paper, after doing more research, a lot of this comes off as super surface level. Sure, some elements can sound cool, but a lot of it is a stretch, especially the acceptance portion, since the light arrows aren't really a storyable of it. I mean, you use them to beat the boss, but they aren't this grand item like in other games in the series. Also, there are many inconsistencies in this theory, as certain characters in different regions are also experiencing different emotions, contrary to what the theory states. This is not even to mention how the theory doesn't really say what the grieving process is over. Some say it's the lost Navi, while others go for the more edgy take that Link is actually dead the entire game, and we are playing as his ghost, coming to terms with himself in the afterlife. I honestly recommend you play through Majora's Mask yourself and coming up with your own conclusion. The game really is amazing, and has a lot of interesting ideas and themes that go a lot deeper than what the theory suggests. It's probably the best story in the entire series, and if you still choose to subscribe to this theory, then go for it. In Super Mario World, whenever Mario is riding Yoshi, it appears like Mario is punching Yoshi in the head to make him stick his tongue out. This really isn't the case, since if you look at the sprite more clearly, you can clearly see that Mario is pointing and not making contact with Yoshi's head. There's even official artwork that shows this more clearly in action. Of course, since the game is super old, it's no mystery as to why many players interpreted this motion as punching. It was later revealed by the developers of the game that Mario was originally meant to punch Yoshi, but was later changed to pointing since most players will end up feeling bad for Yoshi. Which, yeah. For the longest time, there was a fan theory stating that the entirety of Super Mario Bros. 3 was actually a stage play. Most of the evidence pertains to the way the game's stages are laid out. For example, the game begins with the curtains being pulled to reveal a stage. Multiple platforms are either hanging from the ceiling or are bolted to the walls, with a lot of the platforms casting shadows. And you even run off the stage to end the level, almost as if you're ending a scene and going to the next. It was honestly a very cute theory. But, in September 2015, in promotion for the then up-and-coming Super Mario Maker, Nintendo posted Mario Miss for Mr. Miyamoto, where Miyamoto actually answered a bunch of fan questions, confirming once and for all that Super Mario Bros. 3 was indeed a stage play. He also deconfirmed another famous theory that Mario in the box art of the original Super Mario Bros. Was about to die. He even stated that he is the mother of Bowser Jr., which, oh my. Back when games used to run on cartridges, there was a very common belief that if your game wasn't working, then all you had to do was to take out the cartridge and blow on it to get it to work again. This really does work, but many companies, including Nintendo, advised against doing this since this could potentially end up damaging the cartridge in the long run. Still, many people did this despite the warning. I remember having to do this all the time back when I used to own a Super Nintendo, and it always worked for me. But after doing more research, it's advisable to actually learn how to clean the cartridge properly to avoid actually damaging them, because blowing onto it could actually lead to a lot of moisture buildup, and then the game will forever be destroyed. Nintendo actually has a lot of franchises that haven't released a game in a long time, and many will consider them to be dead since they don't see the possibility of them ever coming back. Some of the franchises include Kid Icarus, Pilotwings, and even Earthbound, even though the series is done according to the creator, but I guess this mostly relates to how the game hasn't been localized, like we talked about earlier in the Iceberg. Most of these games not returning makes sense, since I can't imagine getting much more mileage out of a game like Balloon Fight. But other series don't make sense as to why they haven't returned, like F-Zero for example. This is a series that many have clamored for a return, but Miyamoto claims he hasn't found a new idea on where to take the series, which is why the series has remained dormant, with the last game being released back in the GBA in 2004. F-Zero fans finally got a new game released during the 2023 September Direct. Let's see what it is.
F-Zero 99.
Well, at least the fans seem to be happy about it. Other game series that aren't dead but some would consider being on the edge of being dead since they haven't had an official game in almost a decade are Star Fox and the Donkey Kong Country series.
What about Star Fox?
Other games were perceived as being dead, such as Metroid, but has since made a huge comeback with how much support the series has gotten during the Switch era. Hopefully, Nintendo brings back some of these series in some fashion, and they won't actually stay dead. In the original Super Mario Bros., there was this weird glitch that would take you into this infinite water world where you would do nothing but swim until you ran out of time. This place is called the Minus World, since loading into the level would read as -1, instead of the regular world dash level. Many people were first made aware of this through an issue of Nintendo Power, showing off in detail on how you too could get into this cursed world. There is actually more to this one level, as in the Japanese version of the game, there are actually 4 entire Minus World stages to complete, giving you some of the abominations you are watching on screen now. Beating all 4 of these causes the game to get really confused, and the next time you boot the game up, it unlocks the hard version of the game that normally unlocks after you beat the game for the first time. You could even use a Game Shark to access even more Minus World levels, with there being around 215 levels that are stored in the game's data. I'm not really sure why this all happens, so I'm going to recommend watching this video by Tetrabit Gaming that goes through this in a bit more detail. Link in the description. In Mario Kart 64, if you played on the Royal Raceway track, you could actually go off-road and drive onto Princess Peach's castle. This place is a lot more detailed than you would think for something that is not part of the main track, and I'm 90% sure that this was taken straight from Mario 64. I'm also sure that this was an excuse to reuse assets, as this is the same setting where the award ceremony takes place. Despite the area's detail, you can actually enter the castle, causing some players to wonder if you could somehow enter or even clip through the door, allowing you to drive inside the castle. But unfortunately, there is no possible method to enter through the castle's door, and even if there was, I'm pretty sure there was nothing behind it. Although if there was a way to actually drive inside, it would have been extremely memorable. Royal Raceway was actually added into Mario Kart 8, but they have blocked off the access to Princess Peach's castle, which is a bit of a shame since that was one of the best parts about the original track. In the original Super Mario Bros., in order to beat a level, you would have to touch the flagpole at the end of the level. Some players were curious if it was possible to somehow jump over the flagpole, and if so, what was on the other side? Well, as it turns out, this is actually possible in certain levels of the game. More specifically, in Roll-1, Roll-2-1, Roll-3-3, and Roll-7-2. And what would be on the other side? Nothing. Yep, absolutely nothing. The level just goes on in an infinite loop with nothing of interest being on the other side. If you want to try and do this for yourself, there are plenty of tutorials on how you too could waste a lot of your time. In Super Mario Bros. The Lost Levels, it is also possible to jump over the flagpoles, but on some of these levels, they actually hide a few warp zones after it. But don't get your hopes up, as some of these warp zones will send you back to the previous worlds, because this game wasn't annoying enough. In Super Smash Bros. Melee, there was this common belief that there was more hidden characters in the game, the most popular being Sonic and Tails. Many fans wanted Sonic to be in Smash because it would have been like a dream come true, since it would have allowed for two of video games' biggest icons, Mario and Sonic, to be in the same game and duke it out. The biggest theory on unlocking Sonic and Tails came from an article on Electronic Gaming Monthly, claiming that if you could beat 20 enemies in Cruel Melee, which is one of the hardest game modes in the entire game, would actually unlock a fight against Sonic and Tails, and if you beat them, it would allow you to unlock them and play as them. This was of course proven false, since anyone who actually attempted to do this will once again learn that this would unlock nothing. Plus, the article was published on April Fools, which EGM is notorious for spreading lies on. Still, many people fell for this, and I'm sure there's some people out there convinced that there's something after this because of how difficult this game mode is and they haven't been able to do it themselves. In an interview with the head of the Sonic team at the time, Yuji Naka, he claimed that Sonic was considered to be in Melee but was cut due to the game being too far into development and had no time to be added in. Hideo Kojima also reportedly wanted Solid Snake to be added into Melee, but was also denied due to the same reasoning. However, with the next game in the series, both Sonic and Solid Snake were made playable. Tails sadly has never been made playable, being regulated to a background character, and worst of all, a Mii costume. Maybe next time. This is an infamous game theory episode that posits the idea that Sans from Undertale is actually Ness from Earthbound. The video got a lot of backlash the moment it was released from both Earthbound and Undertale fans for making a theory that many thought lacked any real evidence to back up its claim. But by far the worst part was when the theory tried to connect the Earthbound Halloween hack, a game that was made by the creator of Undertale, Toby Fox, with Undertale. If you don't know, Toby Fox has stated that he basically disavowed the hack since he made it back when he was 16, and is very embarrassed by it. Also, trying to connect an unofficial ROM hack to a game that many would consider one of the greatest of all time is just in bad taste. In another game theory episode about Undertale, MatPat actually ended up addressing the backlash he got for his Santa's Nest video, talking about how he was afraid of making any more Undertale videos due to the toxicity he got for that video. He also addressed the backlash he got for giving the Popa Steam code to Undertale, which is real, look it up. But in all honesty, I do think people went a little overboard with the hate on him, because at the end of the day, it's just a dumb theory. But then Game Theory landed in even more controversy when they streamed Heartbound, an upcoming indie game, but decided to make the thumbnail and search tags focus on Undertale. Not to mention that the livestream didn't even link the game page in the description and misspelled the studio's name. The developers, Pirate Software, actually called out MatPat on Twitter, to which MatPat actually responded, but he came across as super condescending and tried to play it all off. Toby Fox will also end up getting involved with this tweet. You should link to any game you play. Creators need all the help they can get, and think carefully if you're misleading your audience with how you present your videos. You went too far this time. After all the backlash they got from Twitter, as well as getting a response from Toby Fox himself, MatPat will end up making a full apology to Pirate Software, as well as changing the stream title and thumbnail. He also would make a promise that they will always link the game in the description, as well as not clickbaiting their audience. The Sans' Ness theory is now widely mocked, and is still memed on to this day. Still, I don't fully blame MatPat for trying to connect the two, since Toby Fox was very much inspired by Earthbound while making Undertale, so the comparison isn't apt. It's just that he chose the worst possible way to connect the two. Super Mario 64 DS is a remake of Super Mario 64 that somehow managed to fit into a handheld back in 2006. The remake also added more, such as new levels, mini-games, and even 3 new playable characters, that being Luigi, Wario, and Yoshi. But much like the original Mario 64, a rumor began to circulate, stating that a 4th hidden character was in the game, that being Waluigi. Many first thought that Waluigi could be hidden behind the 4th door that was in the same room where you unlocked the rest of the characters. But once you unlocked the door, the only thing that was in there was a power star, so that was quickly debunked. Some also speculated that Waluigi could be hidden on top of the castle and could be unlocked once you 100% the game, similar to how you would find Yoshi in the original game. But once again, if the players did this, there would be no sign of Waluigi. If you couldn't already tell, this was very similar to the old Ella's Real rumors, but unlike that game, there has never been any concrete evidence to suggest that Waluigi was at one point considered to be a playable character in the DS remake. Despite this, some fans speculated that he could have been cut since the instruction booklet appears to have a purple rabbit that does not appear in the final game. This could have hinted at Waluigi, with purple being his signature color, and since the rest of the characters all have corresponding rabbits, this was a somewhat reasonable theory. Then there was the black box theory, where some players assumed that in the file select screen, you could see a dark and gray box just outside of Princess Peach's castle, despite nothing being there in the game. This led some people to think that Waluigi was hidden in there. This most likely isn't the case, since this is likely a leftover image from an earlier build of the game. In fact, during the 2004 E3 presentation, some people stated that this was a canon that was usable in an early demo of the game, back when it was still called Super Mario 64 by 4. People would also end up digging through the game files, but only ever found 4 playable characters, with no Waluigi in sight. This didn't stop people from theorizing, with some even making hoaxes, the most famous one being this fake article called Purple Prizes, which would require the player to collect all the stars and be the fastest foot racer in all the land, whatever that meant. You would then unlock a hidden switch that would unlock a boss battle with King Rabbit. Upon defeating him, you will receive a key to unlock his door, and boom, you could then play as everyone's favorite DDR champion, Waluigi. For some reason, despite this being an April Fool's joke, many people still spread this around, with even some claiming that this was featured on IGN and Nintendo Power, despite that never being the case. The article didn't specify what you needed to even do to unlock him, which only made this particular hoax more funny because of how intentionally vague it was. Some of the links that some people went through fabricating these hoaxes were quite entertaining, but I don't realistically see Waluigi being featured in a main series Mario game, not until he gets into Smash at least. During any boss fight against Bowser in Super Mario 64, when Mario tosses Bowser, he can be heard saying this quote.
So long, Bowser!
Many people, including myself, hear Mario say, "So long, gay Bowser," despite the fact that that is not what is being said. Many have debated whether he is saying "So long, King Bowser" or "So longa Bowser," but according to Charles Martinet, Mario's first voice actor, he stated that he's saying "So long, Kinga Bowser." Even after all of that, I can still only hear "So long, gay Bowser" no matter how hard I try. Nintendo ended up releasing an updated version of this game in 1997 that would patch many glitches as well as changing the infamous line to "bye-bye." This version will also be included in the Super Mario 3D All-Stars, which upset many speedrunners and fans of Gay Bowser. But Nintendo will end up releasing the original unaltered version to the Nintendo Switch Online expansion pack, with the glitches and Gay Bowser intact. This is an old meme of this cursed-looking Luigi, also known as WeeGee. This is actually based off a sprite from the DOS version of Mario is Missing, which was an educational game that tricked many Mario fans into thinking that this was going to be a real game. This is easily one of the most disappointing games to have played as a kid, cause you go in expecting it to be a cool solo Luigi side-scroller adventure, only to be met with disappointment. But the only notable thing to come out of this, of course, was this Luigi sprite. Years later, a user on an old internet forum will bring this sprite up again, then remake it into the infamous WeeGee image we know now. WeeGee would then appear in 4chan, to which it would then spread across the internet. WeeGee was also used as a character featured in a lot of YouTube poops, which were old video shitposts from back in the day. The Tetraforce is an interesting fan theory that suggests that there may be a fourth hidden piece of the Triforce, with the biggest piece of evidence being the Hylian shield from Ocarina of Time. The shield not only has the Triforce, but it also has a fourth triangle resting beneath the Hylian eagle. This caused some fans to speculate that this was a hint at another piece of the Triforce. Despite this belief, this has never been acknowledged by Nintendo, as the Hyrule Historia has only ever confirmed 3 pieces of the Triforce, but this theory remained strong throughout the years. Without diving too deep into Zelda lore, when Hyrule was created, 3 gods descended from the sky, each representing a piece of the Triforce, but some have speculated that a 4th god may have been involved. Since each god represents either power, wisdom, or courage, fans have theorized that a 4th god could have been the god of time. However, in Phantom Hourglass, it suggests that one of the 3 gods could have been the god of wisdom and time, which pretty much debunks this theory. Honestly though, this whole theory, much like other Zelda theories, is extremely dense and has a lot of evidence behind it, with my personal favorite being the Fierce Deity mask somehow connecting to the Tetraforce. The Fierce Deity mask is implied to be as dangerous as Majora's mask, with some pointing out that Fierce Deity Link has a triangle on his chest, maybe implying the 4th piece of the Triforce. But ultimately, I think this would only ever be a theory, as the Hylian shield has been changed to no longer include the 4th triangle, to maybe even quell the Tetraforce theories, although this design was still used in Super Smash Bros. Melee and Soul Calibur 2. Similar to the Zelda timeline before it was confirmed by Nintendo, many fans have also speculated if the Mario series has a timeline as well. But unlike the Zelda series, Mario doesn't exactly have the strongest story, since most of those games focus on gameplay with a really simple story. This, however, hasn't stopped fans from trying to connect the games on a timeline though, the most famous of these being Game Theory's video on how they think the Mario timeline would go. The timeline would start with the Yoshi's Island series, where Mario and Luigi are both seen as babies, but the timeline immediately goes off the rails since we jump into the future with Mario and Luigi partners in time, since in that game, Mario and Luigi team up with their baby counterparts via time travel. Then we go into the future with the Mario Bros. Game, where both Mario and Luigi become plumbers, before we jump into Super Mario Bros., where the brothers are tasked with saving Princess Peach for the first time from King Koopa, as Bowser was known back then. Super Mario Bros. The Lost Levels is pretty much a repeat of the same thing since the story is just the same as the first. The theory also just flat out ignores Super Mario Bros. 2, aka Super Mario USA, aka Doki Doki Panic, since that game is apparently a dream and we could just ignore it. But where I think this timeline gets really confusing is Super Mario Bros. 3, since we now know that it's a stage play as confirmed earlier in the Iceberg, so how does it exactly fit in the timeline? Is it an actual adventure or a recreation of the adventure in front of an audience? It's a bit messy. I would recommend watching the video for yourself, but the video has aged really poorly, since the theory only goes up to 2015, so the games such as Odyssey, Mario Maker, Bowser's Fury, and Super Mario Wonder aren't accounted for. But what I think has made this theory age even worse was the idea that Pauline was Mario's mother, since we now know that she isn't, since Mario doesn't have the slightest reaction upon seeing her in Odyssey, nor does she even care. I do think the idea of Mario having some sort of timeline would be interesting, but Nintendo has never acknowledged it, and I don't think they ever will, since the Mario games don't really need it. Plus, if they do, it would require a lot more heavy lifting than the Zelda timeline, because it would be way more messy to try and fit together. Earlier in the Iceberg, we talked about the Philips CDI and how Nintendo almost made a partnership with Sony to make a disc-based add-on for the Super Nintendo, where the prototypes that Nintendo and Sony worked on were also called the Nintendo PlayStation. The Nintendo PlayStation was deep in production before it was cancelled, but because the prototypes were already made, this caused some of them to end up in the hands of collectors. This is such an odd but cool commodity of what could have been, but why did Nintendo decide to back away on making the PlayStation in the first place? Well, for some context, Sony already had a relationship with Nintendo, since they were the ones to provide an audio chip for the SNES. Sony would then try to convince Nintendo to make a CD-ROM drive for the SNES, but Nintendo was reluctant, since they thought that CDs were too slow. However, they would end up striking a deal anyways, allowing Sony to make a disc-based add-on for the SNES, as well as making a hybrid console that could play both SNES games as well as Super Disc games, as they were known back then. But Nintendo began to regret the partnership, since the deal would have allowed Sony to retain licensing rights over the disc-based add-on, effectively giving them control over the software of the console. Furthermore, President of Nintendo, Hiroshi Yamauchi, was wary of Sony's expansion, since they were afraid they were essentially being used to push Sony into the video game market. So before they were set to announce the disc-based add-on, Nintendo held a secret meeting with Philips in order to strike a better deal, which we know led to the CDI games. So once Sony announced their hybrid console / disc-based add-on for the SNES at that year's Consumer Electronics Show, Nintendo and Philips will also announce their partnership at that same event. This caused a lot of tension with both Sony and Nintendo, but they tried to make the hybrid console anyways, which is how we still ended up with some prototypes. Sony would soon end their partnership with Nintendo, and instead take what they already had to develop their standalone console, the PlayStation. Still, this makes you wonder, had Nintendo and Sony remained in their partnership, would PlayStation and Nintendo have been combined into making games under one household? And if so, would that have meant that Sony exclusives would have turned into Nintendo games and vice versa? Which is just so weird to think about. Still, this is said by many to be one of Nintendo's biggest mistakes. This was the speculated third game for the Banjo-Kazooie franchise that was never confirmed to be worked on by Rare. The Banjo-Kazooie games were arguably some of the most important titles for the N64, being regarded by many as some of the best 3D platformers at the time. A third game was teased at the end of Banjo Threeie, with the bad guy Gruntilda flat out saying the title for the next game, Banjo Threeie. Fans pretty much thought this game was all but confirmed, and was most likely going to release within the next console generation. There was even what appeared to be a short trailer for the upcoming game at Space World 2000, but this is not a teaser for Banjo Threeie, but instead a tech demo for the GameCube. In fact, Banjo Threeie was never confirmed to be in development, since Rare began to work on Grabbed by the Ghoulies instead. After Microsoft bought Rare in 2002, there seemed to be no word of a third game. It wasn't until 2006 that a teaser would be released, confirming that Banjo-Kazooie was returning, with many fans speculating that this was the fabled Banjo Threeie. However, when Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts was released, many were extremely disappointed that this game played completely differently than the previous titles. It was later revealed by Rare employees that they were working on a remake for the first Banjo game, called Banjo X. This game would have played mostly the same as the first one, but drastically changed as the game progressed, with the characters also becoming self-aware that they're reliving the same moments again. Not much is known about the remake, other than what has been shared, but we do know that the game was cancelled, and will later be reworked into nuts and bolts. The series has since remained dormant, with the last time Banjo and Kazooie being acknowledged was when they were announced as a DLC fighter for Smash Bros. Ultimate, and getting the worst stage in the game. Nintendo has been infamous when it comes to protecting their intellectual property. This has caused them to issue DMCA notices to pretty much anything, including fan games. This has happened multiple times, where a fan game is announced to the public, only for it to be taken down due to a DMCA notice sent by Nintendo. This almost always causes controversy, since most of the time, fan games are not gaining a profit and tend to be a love letter to Nintendo. Still, Nintendo is a cold-hearted company and only really cares about the bottom line. This has resulted in numerous fan games being shut down by Nintendo. Some of the more notable shutdown games were Pokémon Uranium, another Metroid 2 remake, Mario Royale, and so many more. In the very first Super Smash Bros. Game, a very interesting cutscene plays during the intro of the game, where a disembodied hand is floating around a child's room, picking up various Nintendo toys, before bringing them to life and making them fight each other. This has caused some to speculate that this game series is actually the imagination of a child as he plays with his toys, which would explain why a bunch of Nintendo characters would be fighting each other. This kinda makes sense, since anytime you lose in the single player, your character turns back into a toy until you hit continue and they spring back to life. Even the final boss of the game, Master Hand, could be interpreted as the hand we saw in the beginning of the game. However, once more sequels came out, this idea has been slowly phased out, especially with the more story-heavy games like in Brawl or even Ultimate to an extent, where the story becomes a lot more experimental and a bit incomprehensible if you ask me. There have been some theories on trying to connect the entire series as being in the imagination of a kid, but I don't think they fit quite as well as the first game. During the DLC cycle for Super Smash Bros. 4, this supposed leaked image showing a Smash accurate render of Rayman went viral, with many believing him to be the next DLC fighter for that game. This fooled a lot of people, since it looked to be extremely authentic. It even included a new render for the then announced returning DLC fighter, Mewtwo, as well as having an extremely well done video to accompany the image. Many thought this was all but confirmed, until the leaker, Kuromatic, later came out and said that it was all fabricated by him. This was honestly one of the best hoaxes in my opinion, because of how well done it was. A lot of effort was clearly put into making this hoax, and it really ended up fooling a lot of people at the time. I really recommend watching the video by Kuromatic himself, as he explained how he pulled it off. Kuromatic also has a series of videos called Smashify, where he recreates characters into a Smash Bros. Accurate style. As for Rayman, he would sadly never be included in any Smash Bros. Game as a playable character, only being regulated into a trophy and spirit. There was also a supposed theory that Rayman was hidden in the Battlefield stage in Ultimate, which some thought to be a hint of him being included in the DLC, but nothing ever came of that. This is a fan theory that all Nintendo games are connected in the same universe, which would make sense since most of their games have had numerous crossovers with one another. Aside from the obvious crossover game like Smash Bros, most Nintendo games do connect and often share games and characters with each other. The biggest example being the Donkey Kong and Mario franchises, as both series have made appearances in each other's games. There is also the Mario and Luigi series, which referenced a lot of other Nintendo games, as well as a cut feature in the first game where the bros would meet numerous characters from multiple different Nintendo franchises, such as Metroid, Pikmin, and even Star Fox. In Link's Awakening, multiple Mario enemies show up in that game, with the most notable one being this pet Chain Chomp that is ripped straight from the Mario series. But since that game is in a dream, it would make sense why these creatures would cross over. Kinda. Even in Ocarina of Time, there's this pretty well hidden Easter egg that shows Mario and a bunch of other characters in portraits. However, despite fans' best efforts, most of these games really don't connect all that well and stand alone for the most part, with the games I mentioned being the exception more than the rule. Even with Mario and Luigi, when they remade the first game, they pretty much stripped all references just to make sure that they stayed in their own little universe. With the new Mario movie and more Nintendo movies to come, I'm sure they'll try to connect each movie to each other so we can have that inevitable Smash Bros. Movie. The Pokémon anime is a very popular show that has been around for a long time, and has had a number of episodes that were banned from ever airing due to their controversial nature. The most infamous episode being Electric Soldier Porygon. This episode caused over 680 kids to be hospitalized due to the harsh strobe lights that were present throughout the episode, with most kids suffering from headaches, nausea, and even seizures. This episode even caused a case of mass hysteria, as after the episode aired, over 12,000 children reported having symptoms after having watched the episode. This caused the anime to go on a 4-month hiatus, as well as changing previous episodes to reduce the harsh lights of the show, to prevent similar incidents from occurring. Electric Soldier Porygon was also banned from ever airing again, and was never released outside of Japan. Because of this episode, Porygon and his evolution line were also banned from ever appearing in the anime again. This has caused a subset of fans to cry out for justice for Porygon, with even the official Pokemon Twitter account tweeting out their support, saying that Porygon did nothing wrong. The tweet has since been deleted though. There have been other infamous episodes that were banned, but only in the States, such as the beach episode, which was banned due to its more raunchy nature. It would only be aired as the lost episode in the 2000s with a more heavily cut down version of the episode, but it only aired twice before also being pulled. There was also the Jinx episodes that were banned due to Jinx's insensitive design, which Game Freak would later change to make Jinx a lot less insensitive. Other episodes, such as the Safari Zone episode, would also be banned in the States due to its frequent use of guns, confusing many American fans as to how Ash got so many Tauros. There are even banned episodes that are considered to be lost media. The Team Rocket vs Team Galactic episodes were pulled from ever airing after the 2011 earthquake and tsunami disasters in Japan, which was one of the most devastating earthquakes to ever be recorded. The episodes were actually a retcon out of continuity, and there has been no word on the episodes ever being released. It wasn't until May 2023 that the scripts for the episodes would make their way onto the internet, finally shedding some light on the lost banned episodes. In The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, some fans have spotted an NPC that has a striking resemblance to the late Robin Williams. Many fans assume that this is a way for Nintendo to pay tribute to the actor, who passed away in 2014. Robin Williams was actually a huge fan of the Legend of Zelda series, with him even naming his daughter after Princess Zelda. They were both also featured in a trailer for Ocarina of Time 3D, which is honestly one of the cutest things ever.
Dad.
I saved your kingdom.
Dad.
Yes, Zelda?
Are you mixing me up with the princess again?
Hard to say, you're both pretty magical.
The Wizard is a film that was released back in December 1989. Many would consider it to be a huge advertisement for Nintendo, however, since the entire movie has countless product placement by them. Like seriously, just look at the scene where the whole point of it is to show off the Power Glove.
I love the Power Glove. It's so bad.
Classic. This film was also the first time people in North America were introduced to Super Mario Bros. 3, which is crazy to think about. It's like if Nintendo were to charge people just so they could see the next Nintendo Direct. The movie is also just bad, but it does have some pretty iconic moments, like the scene we just saw earlier. In Super Smash Bros. Melee, it's actually possible to play as Master Hand. Master Hand is one of the main bosses in the Smash Bros. Series, and so being able to play as him is a pretty interesting glitch that can be performed when playing any copy of Melee. All you need to do is to have your controller in the player 3 slot, as well as doing a series of precise button presses, and if done correctly, you can control and play as Master Hand. The reasoning behind this is that Master Hand has a player ID that is not normally accessible to the player, but due to the glitch, it allows the player to select them as if they were actually any other character. Playing as Master Hand is overpowered, since they cannot be knocked out of the stage and never lose a stock, unless you have the game set to stamina mode, of course. This glitch can also cause your game to crash for a multitude of reasons. I remember learning about this rumor way back in the day, but I didn't actually believe it since I thought it was just another hoax. But despite how outlandish this all sounds, it was 100% doable. This is an infamous NPC quote from Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link. In order to reach this NPC, the player must travel to Ruto Town and enter this house, to which they will be greeted by this character in a purple tunic. If they speak to them, they will greet you with this quote saying, "I am Error." This has caused many to assume for decades that this is either a glitch or a mistranslation. However, if you look at the Japanese version, they will also say the same thing, with the quote translating to, "My name is Error." So this NPC's name is literally Error. While the story has never been released, many assume that this must have been an in-joke from the developers. In fact, there was another NPC in the game who was identical to Error but happened to wear a red tunic. He would have said the name, "My name is Bug," but the translators actually screwed up with his dialogue and said his name is actually Bagu instead. Still, I Am Error went on to become a meme in the 2000s, along with many other classics like All Your Belays Are Belong to Us and A Winner Is You. The quote has also been referenced in many other games, such as The Binding of Isaac, Super Paper Mario, and many others. The UK version of the Nintendo website used to have this pop-up whenever the site had an 404 error. There was even a reference shown during one of Nintendo's Treehouse events, where the power went out, causing this cute little error message to pop up for anybody who was watching the stream. Ben Drowned is one of the best creepypastas of all time, which, if you don't know, were basically internet camp stories that were absolutely everywhere in the early 2010s. The story of Ben Drowned, or Haunted Majora's Mask Cartridge as it was originally called, follows the story of Jerusalem and his exploration of the supposed haunted copy of Majora's Mask. The story was first told mostly through 4chan's paranormal board X, in which Jerusalem documents his experience of playing the haunted game. He talks about how his friend gave him his old N64, which made him want to go out and hunt for more cheap games. He ends up finding many while visiting garage sales, but he finds one peculiar garage sale with a table of junk and an old man standing out in front. This compels Jerusalem for some reason to talk to the man and ask him if he has any more games by chance, to which the old man brings out a box that had one N64 cartridge with the words Majora's Mask written in black marker. The old man gives the game away for free, which makes Jerusalem super happy as he so happened to really want that copy of that game. He goes home to play it, only to notice that there is already another save file with the name Ben on it. He decides to make a new save file with the name Link. While playing it, he notices that the game had a few glitches and graphical errors. But what really got to him was the fact that the NPCs would constantly refer to him as Ben, rather than Link. This annoys Jerusalem so much that he ends up erasing the Ben save file, hoping it would fix things. It didn't. But what made everything go to hell was when Jerusalem tries to perform the 4th day glitch, which causes the entire game to freak out. Then the effigy of emptiness Link statue would appear, and it somehow started to follow Jerusalem throughout the game. The story gets more and more creepy as Jerusalem would describe in detail how the game seemed to be aware that he was playing it. Eventually, after a series of more posts, Jerusalem would come to realize that the game was perhaps haunted by the previous owner, who was named Ben, and as he continued to play the game, he would come to learn that Ben died by drowning. This is honestly such a great story that is quite believable in its depiction of a haunted copy of a game, but what really sold it was the fact that the author provided video of his playthrough of the game, which showed proof that everything that he wrote in the story did actually happen. Of course, this is most likely a ROM hack of the game to make the story more believable, but the fact that the creator went through the extra effort really elevates this whole story as a whole. This creepypasta really stands out from the rest, as despite how cliche it is now, it really did a great job at telling its story. There is also a lot more to this story, as it ran from 2011 and didn't end until 2020. I'm not as well versed with that portion of the story, but luckily, Sakuro has a great video that recaps the whole ARG if you're interested in learning more about the story. link in the description. This is an infamous joke where there appears to be a hidden message in the title of Super Mario Galaxy. If you look closely at the letters that have a little star on them, you would soon notice that they spell out "You are Mr. Gay." This quickly became a meme, as many thought this was an intentional subliminal message for Nintendo to insult its child fan base. But when Super Mario Galaxy 2 was released, the stars on the letters would change and no longer spelled out the same. But this didn't stop people from noticing that the new star letters have another message spelled backwards, saying, "Yeah, I am, are you?" This of course is most likely just a coincidence, but it's a pretty funny one at that. Stop and Swap was a cut feature from the first Banjo-Kazooie game. The developers had planned out this feature, which would require the player to collect one special item from one game, which would then unlock something else for another. This would have been accomplished by swapping the cartridge within 10 seconds, which would have allowed just enough data for it to carry over to the next. The feature was taking advantage of Nintendo 64's hardware, which hypothetically would have allowed data to be carried over a small period of time. Despite this feature being cut, the game would still tease the player with these items at the end of the game, despite most of these items being inaccessible. The most infamous item being the Ice Key, which was in view of the player but could not be reached since it was locked behind a transparent wall. Many players were very confused about this feature since it was only ever brought up in the first game, then seemingly ignored. However, a group of fans called the Rare Witch Project would end up hacking the game and discovered that there was cheat codes that would have allowed the player to collect these stop and swap items, and after being collected, it would bring up a special menu. But even after all of that, nothing would happen. The reason why Stop and Swap was cut was revealed in a letter that was released in 2020 that basically confirmed that Nintendo made Rare cut the feature. Nintendo feared that Stop and Swap could either damage the console or the game cartridge. This feature would have been present in both Donkey Kong 64 and Banjo Threeie, unlocking items for both of those games. The feature would end up resurfacing, however, once the Xbox ported over the original Banjo-Kazooie to the Xbox Live Arcade, which would finally allow the player to access the Stop and Swap feature. The feature will also unlock items for Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts. Rare will also poke fun at the feature, constantly referencing it in some of their games, and telling people to stop caring about it. Brutus was a supposed villager from the first Animal Crossing game. This villager was a purple dog with red eyes who will only ever show up at nighttime. He would terrorize your village, like chopping down all your trees, kidnapping your favorite villagers, and even deleting your save file for good measure. He would also send you letters that were written in binary code, and if you tried to enter his house, your game would crash or get deleted. Depends on who tells the story. But like many other urban legends on this list, this is all false, as I doubt that developers would program in something that would try to delete the player's save file, especially for a game with a target demographic of kids. Mew Threeie is a fake, legendary Pokemon that some fans believe to be hidden in the first generation of Pokemon, similar to the theories like Mew being under the truck. Mew Threeie was supposed to be the second clone of Mew, who was stronger than both Mew and Mewtwo combined. But despite how cool and edgy they would have been, they are of course not real. This hasn't stopped people from spreading hoaxes of this apparent Pokemon still, with some people even making ROM hacks that would include Mew Threeie. Despite Mew Threeie being fake, during the film Mewtwo Strikes Back, after the scientists have successfully created Mewtwo, one of the scientists explains that they can now start working on Mew Threeie. The manga, Pokemon Pocket Monsters, also references Mew Threeie, with Red's Clefairy transforming into the supposed Mew Threeie. But during the pre-release of Pokemon X and Y, a short teaser would be released that showed off a weird-looking Mewtwo with no confirmation on what it was. Many took this to assume that this was going to be Mew Threeie, but this would later be shown to be one of Mewtwo's Mega Evolutions, Mega Mewtwo Y. I actually couldn't find much information on this one, but I'm assuming this may be referring to a secret 9th world hidden in Super Mario Bros. 3, similar to the Star World in Super Mario World. But what I think this is most likely referring to is the Warp Zone, since it's technically the 9th world, with even the world map recognizing this whenever you enter the warp zone. There are no playable levels here, as it only teleports you to a different world, similar to a hidden pipe in Super Mario Bros. After Mario Bros. 3, almost every 2D Mario game would include more hidden levels after the main game is beaten. In Ocarina of Time, there is an NPC that runs around Hyrule Field. When you first interact with him, he will talk about how much he likes rabbits, and you can actually sell the bunny hood to him, which will always max out your rupee wallet. But most know the Running Man for challenging you on a race, which no matter how fast you are, the Running Man will always beat you. This caused some players to wonder if he can even be beat, because no matter how hard you try, he always seems to be faster than you. Some players actually decided to hack the game to make Link the fastest thing in the universe, but despite this, the Running Man will still be faster than you by 1 second. This means that the developers decided to play a joke on the player, driving people crazy for ages and wasted their time on an impossible challenge. The final boss of Earthbound is Gygus, this eldritch horde that is honestly one of the craziest boss fights of all time. This is such a dark twist for a game that up to this point had been more lighthearted. So when you have to face this, it really made a lot of players wonder what exactly they were fighting. Well, Gygus is an alien who was raised by 2 humans after they were abducted. They loved and raised Gygus as if they were their own, but when his father learned how to use Psi, which is the psychic powers that are used throughout the Mother series, they are both miraculously sent back to Earth. The use of Psi is strictly forbidden to be used by other species, however, so the aliens tasked Gygus on invading Earth to make sure that the knowledge of Psi could not be used against them. When Gygus does eventually invade, he meets the protagonist of the first game and descendant of Gygus' parents, Niten. Gygus, being a fully grown alien, is far too strong for Niten and his party. So Niten ends up singing a lullaby that was once sung by Gygus' mother, which causes so much emotional distress to Gygus that Niten is able to beat them. With Gygus defeated, he swears that he will come back someday and fully invade Earth, which takes us to the events of Earthbound, where Ness and his party are destined to face Gygus once again. By this point, however, Gygus has grown so powerful that he lost his mind and being, becoming whatever this is. His being is so powerful that Ness and his friends couldn't possibly face him, so that's why they are sent back in the past, where Gygus was slightly weaker to even stand a chance. Even in his weakened state, Gygus is still too powerful, and the only way to beat him is through the power of prayer. This whole fight is extremely trippy and weird, which is why so many people have come up with a lot of theories to try and explain what is even happening during the course of this fight. One of the most famous theories is that Gygus is actually a fetus, with the main evidence being that you had to travel back in time to a point where he was much weaker. This theory had a lot of cred behind it, especially if you look more closely to the background of the fight, where you can faintly see a silhouette of a baby. Also, the arena that you enter to face off Gygus somewhat resembles a womb, giving that much more credence to the theory. But despite all the credible evidence, this has been disproven by the creator of the series, who explained that Gygus was inspired by a very vivid memory when he walked into the wrong movie theater as a young child. In the film, The Military Policeman and the Dismembered Beauty, Itaoi described a scene in which he mistook a murder scene as a... This scene ended up being so traumatizing to Itaoi that it indirectly inspired the Gygus fight at the end of Earthbound. Itaoi went on to describe what he felt while watching the movie. Quote, "There was this sense of terror, having atrocity and eroticism side by side." And that's what Gygus' lines at the end are. During the end, he says, "It hurts, right? That's her breast." It's like, how do I put it? A living being, sensation. To further disprove this theory, Gygus is shown to be a fully grown alien during the events of the first Mother game, so when you travel back in time during Earthbound, it actually takes place between these 2 games. Still, despite this, the final boss is still so trippy and confusing that I don't blame people for still believing this theory to this day. This is another creepypasta based on the original Pokemon Red and Green versions. The story is based off the track used for Lavender Town, which was the site for the Pokemon graveyard. This is strangely a dark place for such a lighthearted game, and the song used here is very eerie, which only added to the discomfort. Apparently, the song for Lavender Town that was originally used in the Japanese version was so distressing and produced such tones that caused many players to have headaches and in some extreme cases to leave the Discord server. According to the creepypasta, the reason why the story wasn't more widespread was because Nintendo covered the whole thing up. This story was also made more believable when a supposed video was released corresponding with the story that showed the original Lavender Town song, and it supposedly showed an image of the Pokemon Ghost Sprite as well as a group of unknown spelling out "Leave Now." This was one of my personal favorite creepypastas when I was younger, and I would consider it to be one of the better ones, even if it has a lot of holes that easily disprove it, such as the fact that Unknown was a Gen 2 Pokemon that doesn't even appear in the first game, or the fact that if this were to actually happen, I doubt it would be so easily covered up. The creepypasta also takes very clear inspiration from the Electric Soldier Porygon incident, which is a bit insensitive, but still added to the believability of the story, at least for the time. The song is also harmless, which is evidenced by the fact that you're listening to it now and you're still here, hopefully. This is a very famous hoax video that supposedly showed off a teaser / hidden port for Super Mario Galaxy for the Nintendo DS. This video explains that all the player needs to do is to collect every single star in the game as both Mario and Luigi, to which a new Luma would appear that will eat all the stars and make a new galaxy. Then you just needed to beat the levels and it would unlock a new port for your DS to download. Despite this video being fake, it was so well done for the time that it actually fooled a lot of people, including my dumbass. But seriously, a lot of gameplay for the DS version of the game looked like something Nintendo would have done in those days. It was a seriously high effort video. I also want to point out how the creator of the video didn't know what to put on the top side of the DS, so he just put the Mario Brothers faces with their life bar on it, which is just so funny to me for some reason. This video was actually made by Pablo Belmonte, who made this video as a final project for his class, which was to make a viral video. There was a surprising amount of effort that went into the making of this entire hoax, as Pablo made his own custom models and gameplay for the entire video, which you could see on his website if you're more curious about the technical aspects. Link in the description. This video will end up blowing up and is currently sitting at 1.7 million views. And for all the effort that went behind this video, it got the deserved grade of B+. Also, what does 1 DS star equals 10 Wii points mean? I need answers. Funnily enough, in 2021, a group of modders actually managed to make a version of Super Mario Galaxy that could natively run on the DS. While the game currently only has one level, the fact that fans actually managed to port a game like Mario Galaxy to the DS is just great. Just don't let Nintendo know about it. In the original Animal Crossing, if you visit another town and decide to turn off / reset your console, the next time you boot up the game, your villager's face will be turned to that of a gyroid. This was a bit unnerving to say the least, and many players who encountered this at first thought it was a glitch of some sort. This was all supposed to be a vague hint towards the player to save their game, which will return your face back to normal once you boot the game back up. Piracy has always been an issue for many video game developers, especially in the past. Due to this, developers have found many creative ways to stop people from pirating the games. They range from stopping progress of the game at a certain point, to even scaring the player and making them think that they're going to hell. But most of the time, a developer would just put a message letting the player know that pirating is bad and a very serious crime that could result in jail time. This was something that was pretty common with older Nintendo games, which would often just display this to people who owned illegitimate copies of their games. Sometimes though, the message would still pop up even if you owned a legitimate copy of the game due to an error or a glitch that makes the game think it's fake. Many players found this to be unsettling, especially with how unintentionally creepy some of these messages can be, especially with Donkey Kong Country 2 and 3 that have these anti-piracy screens alongside the game over screen, which many players already found to be unsettling to begin with. Due to the eeriness of it all, it actually led a small trend of people to make their own anti-piracy screens, the most famous one being for Mario Party DS. This showed a quick snippet of gameplay before the game stopped and would display all the characters behind bars alongside an anti-piracy message. This was so well done that it led many to believe that it was real. Other fake anti-piracy screens were made, but it took it a little bit too far with the creepiness factor, such as with the Mario Kart Wii anti-piracy message, where the entire game ends up glitching and supposedly unlocking a new glitch character and proceeds to make the entire game play like something out of a creepypasta, which just makes the whole thing look stupid in my opinion. Anti-piracy measures have changed to be more DRM based, which has caused old anti-piracy measures to be something of a lost art. In the original Pokemon Red and Blue, when you face off your rival, Gary, Blue, or insert name here, he has a very consistent team. But when you face him off again in the Pokemon Tower, one of his original Pokemon, Raticate, will be missing. This has caused certain fans to speculate that Gary's Raticate was actually killed during his last battle. The main evidence behind this theory was that the last time he faced him off at the SS End, you actually end up severely injuring his Raticate, to which he had to rush him to the Pokemon Center, but it was too late. The next time you see him in the Pokemon Tower, he'll tell you, "What brings you here? Your Pokemon don't look dead," before he challenges you to another battle. Many thought that Gary was actually resentful of the player for killing his Raticate, and came to the Pokemon Tower to pay his respects. Despite this, I highly doubt this theory is valid at all, since there could be a multitude of reasons on why Gary doesn't have his Raticate anymore. For one, it could be because he no longer wanted it on the team, since they are a fairly weak Pokemon, and Gary probably wanted a better teammate, and stored Raticate safely in the Pokemon box. It could also be because they might have traded it for another Pokemon, which could explain how he ended up with an Alakazam, which could only be obtained via trading. While the dialogue does seem like it may be hinting at a Pokemon that passed away, it could also be read as someone who is just being an ass and insensitive to the surroundings around him. This dialogue was actually changed in the remakes Fire Red and Leaf Green, which changed it so it no longer seems like he is hinting at his own Pokemon passing away, but rather being more of an antagonistic brat, like he always should be. This is yet another rumor for Ocarina of Time that claimed that there was a hidden temple that required a lot of tedious work in order to reach. The hidden Sky Temple was a rumor that was often connected to the Triforce theory, where both needed to be found in order to unlock the other. The main reasoning behind this was that the Sage of Light didn't have a temple, similar to the other 7 sages, who all had their own unique temple where you needed to rescue them in order to receive their medallion. But the Sage of Light didn't need to be saved and gives you his medallion the moment you go into the future, which pretty much debunks this theory altogether. Despite this, many fans still ran wild with the theories on the supposed hidden Sky Temple. In fact, just like the other Ocarina of Time hoaxes, there is plenty of videos claiming to have found the supposed hidden temple, with this one video claiming to have found an underground passage that led into a room with a funky looking wall and one enemy, which will then reward their player with one chest, and that's it. That's the hidden Sky Temple apparently. This video also claims that they found a way to beat the Running Man, which is a dead giveaway on this being a hoax. Some fans have tried to claim that the Sky Temple was planned to be included in the game, but was cut for whatever reason. But this isn't true, since there were other temples that were cut during development, like the Wind and Ice temples, and not once was the Sky Temple ever mentioned. This was a codename given to several projects that were being made by Nintendo. such as the sequel to Super Mario 64 and the tech demo for the GameCube, both of which were called Super Mario 128. I'll talk about the sequel to Super Mario 64 first to make this less confusing. So Super Mario 128, or Super Mario 64 2, was being developed by Nintendo for the Nintendo 64 DD, which was a floppy disk add-on for the N64 that would have helped make it more powerful. The Nintendo 64 DD was a commercial failure though, and never released outside of Japan. Due to all this, all projects that were being worked on for the add-on were cancelled, including Super Mario 64 2. This cancelled game would have had a multiplayer function that would have allowed you to play as both Mario and Luigi at the same time, similar to the new Super Mario Bros. Series. During this development, Miyamoto made public comments talking about how they were thinking of allowing the game to let up to 4 players play at the same time. Miyamoto also got the idea of using sphere-like stages and setting the game in space during its development. Other than that, we actually don't know much about this game, since it was presumably cancelled so early on in its development, and not much was publicly made known about it. Jumping ahead to the Super Mario 128 GameCube tech demo, it was shown off at Space World 2000, which showed a very strange game that showed a bunch of Marios throwing boxes and each other off the stage. The stage would then shift constantly before throwing every single Mario off the stage and then turning into a giant pizza that was inserted into a GameCube. This is most likely just shown off to show off the GameCube's graphical capabilities, as well as showing how many characters that can be displayed at once, which would have been very impressive for the time. With how little was actually present at Space World, it was still somehow seen as one of the most anticipated games for 2001, at least according to GamerPro.com, a now defunct website. After this tech demo was shown off, it kinda disappeared as it went into further development. The following Space World showed off Super Mario Sunshine, but it has been confirmed that this is not related to the Super Mario 128 tech demo. In fact, the Super Mario 128 tech demo would evolve into many different projects, most famously with Miyamoto himself saying that the project evolved into Pikmin. This would make a lot of sense, since the tech demo showed off how a GameCube could process hundreds of characters being on screen at once without the console bursting into flames. This project also helped out other games, such as Metroid Prime's physics, as well as Twilight Princess gravity puzzles, but most famously, it influenced Super Mario Galaxy, which fully implemented the sphere-like gameplay that Miyamoto was talking about all those years ago. Super Smash Bros. Melee would also reference this tech demo in one of their events called Super Mario 128, which had you fight 128 tiny Marios, referencing the original tech demo. The Super Mario Bros. 2 that was released in the United States is actually not the real Super Mario Bros. 2. Try to follow this along, because it's about to get slightly confusing. The real Super Mario Bros. 2 was released in 1986 in Japan, but was deemed way too difficult according to Nintendo of America, as the game was seen as far too similar and too annoying for most Americans, which is fair. So Nintendo then decided to take another game they already made, Doki Doki Panic, a game made to advertise an event in Japan, repackaged it and released it as Super Mario Bros. 2, which was then released in 1988 in North America. Since both regions essentially got two different games, both games would then be ported to each other's regions. In Japan, the Super Mario Bros. 2 that was released in America would be released as Super Mario Bros. USA, while the Americans wouldn't get the real Super Mario Bros. 2 until it was released in Super Mario All-Stars in 1993, which had the Japanese Super Mario Bros. 2 renamed as Super Mario Bros. The Lost Levels. Did you get all that? Good, because we're moving on. Despite Super Mario Bros. 2 being a re-themed Doki Doki Panic, it actually changed some aspects, such as no longer requiring the player to beat each level as each character, slightly changing the difficulty of the game, as well as adding the ability to run. Also, since this game was changed into a Super Mario Bros. Game, every enemy and item that appeared in Doki Doki Panic basically got brought over to the Mario universe, such as Birdo, Shy Guys, and Bob-Bombs. Doki Doki Panic was also heavily inspired by the Mario series already, so the switch between the games felt more organic. It even had the same composer for the first Super Mario Bros. This game, despite its odd origin, is still very fun, and I highly recommend people play it at least once. It's also been Video Game Donkey's Game of the Year for the past decade, so that must mean something. People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, or PETA, is an animal rights activist group that is controversial to say the least. They have been known to protest many companies they deem have an unfair treatment of animals, which also happens to include Nintendo. The first time they used a Nintendo property was actually not directed at them, but rather KFC. The Super Chick Sisters is a game where you play as two chicks who have to rescue Pamela Anderson from an evil Colonel Sanders. There is also a sequel, but this time to save Pamela Anderson from Ronald McDonald. Why Pamela Anderson specifically? Well, because she's a donor and vocal supporter of PETA, of course. But the next Nintendo parody game would actually criticize Super Mario 3D Land, as Mario has the Tanuki power-up, which shows Mario wearing a Tanuki suit. This prompted PETA to make Mario Kills Tanuki, a game in which you play as a still-alive skinned Tanuki running after Mario to get your skin back. PETA will release a statement saying that Mario promotes the idea that it's okay to wear fur. Many people rightfully criticize PETA, calling the game poorly researched, since Mario never actually harms a Tanuki to gain the power-up, but does attack many enemies by stomping on them, but that was never brought up in the parody game. PETA would then most infamously go on to criticize Pokemon with their other Flash games, Pokemon Black and Blue and Pokemon Red, White and Blue. Both of these games criticizes Pokemon for supposedly supporting the idea of animal abuse. In Pokemon Black and Blue, you play as Pokemon revolting against their trainers by releasing other Pokemon from captivity, as well as battling against the trainers who captured you. In Pokemon Red, White, and Blue, it does the same thing, but also criticizing Pokemon's collaboration with McDonald's, and as such, talks about how evil McDonald's and the meat industry is. Both of these games were harshly criticized for its use of shock marketing, its overbearing message, as well as being hypocritical, as it was bad to harm Pokemon, but not humans. PETA has also criticized and made other parody games outside of Nintendo, such as Super Meat Boy and Cookie Mama, but besides that, they have largely stopped making these type of shock games, with the last one being released over 10 years ago. In the original Legend of Zelda, the third dungeon has a very peculiar design once you fill out the whole dungeon. This led many people to rightfully assume that this was supposed to be a swastika used by the German party during World War II. However, this is actually supposed to be a manji symbol, as pointed out in the game's manual. This symbol has a much different meaning in Japanese culture, as it's often used in Japanese maps to mark the location of a Buddhist temple and has a much more positive connotation than it does in the West. Despite this, if you didn't know the context behind that, it could still come across as pretty shocking. Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask are considered by many to be some of the best games in the entire Zelda franchise, which is why many people have clamored for remakes/remasters to be made, since both games have aged. While Ocarina of Time did end up getting a remake for the 3DS in 2011, many were still curious if Majora's Mask was gonna get the same treatment. But during the pre-hype of E3 2012, a trailer will leak onto the internet with the title The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask HD for Wii U 2012. The trailer really looked convincing, especially since the game looked to be made from the ground up while still retaining the feel of the original. But as is the case with many other games on this list that seem too good to be true, this trailer would be proven to be a hoax. For one, the trailer was not present at Nintendo's E3 2012 lineup, since they were too busy killing the Wii U at the time, so they had no time to make good games for it, which proved this trailer to be fan-made. There were also some odd choice in music that would have proved this trailer to be fake, with the inclusion of both Finding Nemo's and Iron Man 2's soundtrack, which could explain why the original trailer was taken down. The creators of this video did end up coming out, being Paco Martinez and Pablo Belmonte, who is also the same person who made the Super Mario Galaxy DS hoax video. They basically made this video as a proof of concept to show to Nintendo that this game should be remade. While many wanted this to be true, I doubt Nintendo would have remade Majora's Mask for the Wii U, since they probably would have ported over Ocarina of Time first. Majora's Mask would eventually get the 3DS remake treatment in 2015, alongside the release of the new 3DS. This is referring to the first level in GoldenEye 007, Goldeneye Dam, where off in the distance, you can faintly see an island that is unreachable during normal gameplay. This caused the subset of players to believe that not only could you reach this island by a boat, but there was a super secret hidden thing hidden in the island, or even unlocking the 24th cheat code, which is a whole other thing. But once some players found a way to use a cheating device to access the island without a boat, it was discovered that the island had nothing. Well, not exactly nothing. There were some turrets that did nothing, and a watchtower that had no guards, so I guess that counts as something. In an interview with some of the team members who worked on this game, it was revealed that this island was originally going to be accessible during a gameplay segment and included armor for the player, but was never implemented during development. I would link the interview, but the website's domain seems to be not active anymore, meaning this interview might be lost. Yoshi was first introduced in Super Mario World, and was a rideable dinosaur who would help Mario on his journey. Yoshi instantly became iconic and a mainstay for the Mario franchise, even becoming the main character to the direct sequel of Super Mario World. So when Mario 64 was released, many were curious if Yoshi was in the game, and he was. But he was locked behind getting all 120 stars in the game. Once player did this, they could go to the courtyard where the previously locked cannon would then be unlocked. Then all players needed to do was to shoot up towards the castle where they would meet the best looking Yoshi, who would congratulate the player for getting all the stars, as well as giving you a bunch of 1-ups. Then he would jump back to his home planet, and that was it. Many fans were disappointed that Yoshi only had a minor role in the game and that he gives a fairly useless reward after the game has already been beaten. But similar to Luigi, Yoshi was planned to have some sort of gameplay mechanic but was cut early in development. In an interview with Shigeru Miyamoto, he stated the following when asked about Yoshi. There was originally an event with Yoshi. We weren't satisfied with how it came out though, so we removed it. But since it would be a waste not to use the model we had made, we included him at the end. There are still some game files that showed a Yoshi egg along with a hatching animation that probably would have been used to use Yoshi in a level, similar to Super Mario World, but there may have been some evidence to show that this maybe wasn't a Yoshi egg, but rather Hoot the Owl's egg, since the egg's file name is Bird Egg, which is closely tied with Hoot, whose file name happens to be Bird. Some players would try to find ways to make Yoshi playable, with some players using the Game Shark to actually ride Yoshi, but all this would do is to replace the shell riding animation and replace it with a Yoshi, which makes it look extremely jank. Some players even decided to mod Yoshi back into the game and making him completely rideable, which is honestly pretty neat. Yoshi would of course be made playable in Super Mario 64 DS, and he would be made rideable in the next 3D Mario game, Super Mario Sunshine. In Super Mario Sunshine, there is a humanoid character disguised as a Pianta named Il Piantissimo, who challenges Mario on a foot race similar to how Koopa the Quick did in Super Mario 64. His character is honestly a little odd, as he makes no other appearances in subsequent Mario games, even though there's a teaser at the end of the game with him near the paintbrush that Bowser Jr. uses throughout the game. This made some players curious as to what Il Piantissimo looked like under the mask. Once players gained access to his character model and unmasked him, people almost immediately noticed that he has a striking resemblance to the Running Man from Ocarina of Time. And if you look at the two, yeah, there's no denying it, these are the same character models. Now the question is if this is actually the same character, or if they're just related. There's never been a confirmation by Nintendo since this character has pretty much disappeared after Sunshine. This is referring to a supposed lost educational PSA in which the Mario Bros. To teach a sex ed class to Captain N. The absolute absurdity of this video has caused some to believe that this was real, but this is most likely just a joke made by a fan. This could have also been believable because a lot of PSAs from back in the day were very jarring.
This is crack.
So a sex ed video wouldn't be too far-fetched, especially back then. The video also had a slight resurgence once it became a meme on TikTok, where this voiceover clip from the video was used as a soundbite.
An extending stylus. Hello, little stylus. Hello, Mario.
Super Mario 3D Land, not to be confused with Super Mario 3D World or Super Mario 3D World plus Bowser's Fury, is a fun, lighthearted adventure that was released back in 2011. This game is your typical Mario adventure where you once again have to save the princess from Bowser, but a small, creepy little Easter egg was discovered in one of the levels, similar to the Hell Valley Sky Trees in Super Mario Galaxy 2. In the level 4-4, if the player decides to wait before touching the flagpole at the end of the level, a ghost apparition would appear behind the iron bars. What stands out about this ghost from others in the game is that it has a more humanoid shape, which definitely stands out. Most people wouldn't notice this upon their first playthrough, since they'll finish the level before the guy ever shows up. This ghost actually shows up in multiple levels, but this is his most famous appearance. Some players theorize that this could have been connected to the Hell Valley Sky Trees, but their textures look completely different. In a video by SwankyBox, he shows off the textures in more detail, and it doesn't look like those figures at all. Still, this is a fun, creepy little Easter egg, which we don't get much of in the Mario series. Hopefully we find something like this in Mario Wonder. And I'm going to end the video here. I gotta be honest, this was a huge undertaking for me, since I never done a video of this size before. Still, I'm going to tackle the rest of this iceberg in the second part of the video. I want to give a huge shout out once again to Invisible Elliot for allowing me to make a video on this iceberg. If you somehow stuck around and watched to the very end, you get a cookie. But also, thank you so much for sticking around. I would really appreciate it if you would subscribe and like the video, and once again, thank you for watching.